Okay, starting with a wad of clay that fits in the palm of my hand, trying to compress it and make it as close to a sphere as possible so that I'm starting with an even amount of clay. So I'm holding it in my non-dominant hand, and I like to use my dominant thumb to press into the clay. And notice how I'm taking my opposite hand and trying to keep it intact and together. And I'm also spinning it slightly. You can find various techniques to make sure that you don't bust your thumb all the way through this. So I'm trying to feel for about 1/4 of an inch or so, a little less than half, between my thumb and middle finger to work the base. Then I'm going to use the pads on my fingertips to work around the bottom part, the base of the pinch pot, before I go up any of the sides. And this is a slow process. Really trying to feel with your fingers and visualize where it's thin and where it's thick, because you're trying to keep that as consistent as possible. So with both sides of my hands, I'm trying to keep this intact and together so it doesn't flatten out. I would not go in here and start pinching this direction or open it up like this until you're really ready to do that. So your focus, and notice how I'm smoothing with my thumb and other fingers to keep everything consistent together, but my focus is on the base before I work up the walls. And my hands tire out, and sometimes I switch to the other side. But notice that I'm starting to open the inside slightly, but trying to
Let me see the inside of your pot. I'm going to zoom in a little bit so they can kind of see. Look how smooth that is. Kind of turn your pot just a little bit here so we can get, yeah.
Yeah, if you've got long thumbnails, you're shredding the inside of your pot as you're doing this. So the key is taking your time, feeling for consistency all the way around from the bottom up through the top. Notice I haven't even worked up this. I'm only about right here that I'm working on thinning out the pinch pot. And then now I'm starting to use longer down the pads of my fingers to flatten out the clay.
So one thing I talk about with my students a little bit is, so when you're pinching, you're making a valley. So the impression of your finger is making a valley. So as she's working around that, she's not pushing the valley down twice. She's then trying to feel the peak of it in between the compression, and she's pushing that down. And so you're constantly just pressing that peak down as you're pinching it out. Here in a second, I'll give you kind of a close-up and kind of show you what that looks like. You can kind of see the dips where she's pressing on the pot itself, and as she goes around, then she presses on the top part of that as she's continuing to turn the pot. Now, let's look at the inside again here. I just want to make sure students are aware. I mean, that thumb compressing on the inside really should support the pot and make it really consistent and even on the inside. You should never have to really rework the inside of your pot. It should be, you're really just working the outside of your pot and stretching it around your thumb as you turn it.
You can also stop and just kind of check and make sure. Notice how the more amount of clay that you have, you can't go back and work the base because the lip is going to start compressing into this part of your hand, and it's just going to smash the clay back together. So if you don't have the base of your pinch pot as consistent as you can before you work up the wall, you're going to have a hard time going back in there and thinning that out. So you can stop and feel that you have the same thinness at the base of your pinch pot all the way up the walls. And if it starts getting rough or bumpy or uneven on the mouth, on the lip area, you can just kind of tap it a little bit and then continue
now
to work it around.
Can you talk a little bit about let's say I want my pot to be wider. There's steps that you can do to make your pot wider. You can pull that pot outward when you're pinching. So right now she's keeping that pretty tight, so she's actually lifting a little bit with her outer fingers and pulling in to get that pot in that shape. Okay, we're getting real close here. So we're going to set this aside and we'll talk about it here in just a moment.